Welcome everyone. I'm really excited to have you here. So this session today is gonna be about the No Bad Parts book. Tari has outlined in the description a little bit about the book, and I'm not really sure if you all have started reading it or listening to it, or maybe ordered it or looked up something about it. But clearly, since you're here, you're interested to hear and learn more about it. So what I'm gonna do today is I'm just gonna outline a little bit what the first chapter was about. And if you have any questions, you can also ask any questions in the chat below, and I will answer them for you. So without further ado, one of the main principles that are outlined in No Bad Parts is the concept of the multiplicity of the mind versus the mono mind set, how I like to say it, right? And how that can make a big, big difference in how we relate to ourselves and our internal issues. So the monomind or the unitary mind is something that is still something very prevalent, or something that most of our society, even in psychology and spirituality, is kind of like subscribing to, right? So this is the idea that humans have one mind, kind of like one mind and one body, right? And having separate autonomous personalities is thought to be created through fragmentation of the previously unitary mind. So parts are seen as something pathological, especially in psychology, right? The classical psychology, and we start to fear our parts. We think there's something bad that shouldn't be here, right? So this is the problem, that this can lead us to hate ourselves when we believe we only have one mind that we fail to control, right? So Western culture especially is very set on willpower and controlling, or shaming unwanted parts into submission, which can then create more, polarization within our own mind or in our body, right? Between different parts that are actually fighting each other, right? Um, so yeah, the mono mindset, kind of like this word, permeates many fields, especially in psychology, the DSM, and the whole pathologizing, right, of clients, of the parts of the clients, right? Saying that someone has depression or is a depressed person is very different from saying a person has a depressed part, right? So it's the identification that can make things quite difficult for a person when we are starting to pathologize. In spirituality, we talk about the ego, right? Or in Christianity, the sinful human, meaning that we have this, we have these tendency of animalistic behavior that are quote unquote not very evolved or bad, or just kind of primal, right? Not really understanding that these come actually from our parts. So we tend to shame ourselves, basically. Yeah, so the thing is, though, internal family system sees it in a totally different light. It sees that having parts is a natural state of our mind. We are born with parts. And there's a really great example that Richard Schwartz is making in his book. And he says, it is likely that you experienced your parts in everyday settings, right? Like when you need to make a decision and the parts in your mind are talking to each other and weighing their options, right? So this is what we are experiencing as parts when you have like many thoughts kind of like dropping in, we should do this, or maybe not that, or no, I want to do this. And these are the parts. There's nothing pathological about it. This is something very natural. And they can talk to each other, right? Those parts. Let me see. So, yeah, like I said, the multiplicity of the mind is something very inherently natural. We are born with sub-minds or sub-personalities. The parts are not results of trauma. Instead, what internal family system says is that trauma forces parts in extreme roles they do not like, right? So this changes a lot how we go on about healing or changing certain behaviors or healing certain trauma or how we deal with certain parts that have very strong behaviors or emotions, right? The very sad part or the depressed part or the one that is maybe in procrastination or the striving part, right? That doesn't want to let go. It's just like go, go, go. It really is not something pathological, but we really see it as, oh, there's a part within me that is driving that. It is not me. So this creates already a distance where we stop shaming ourselves and where we can come into relationship with the part and help that part. Instead, in the mono-mind practice, right, we are mostly kind of like taught, right? We are mostly taught to either ignore, correct, or transcend our parts, right? In classical therapy or coachings, we are trying to change a behavior through willpower or control, right? And in spirituality, we try to meditate to quiet down the ego or mind, right? Or transcend the ego altogether. So parts are seen as obstacles that need to be overcome, right? When we look from the monomind practices or monomind mindset, basically. But how Dick Schwartz in Internal Family Systems has discovered is that the more we are trying to get rid of emotions or thoughts, which are which are kind of like, what's it called, which are thoughts and emotions of the parts, right? The stronger they become, right? And there's a reason why. I'm just thinking of something right now. Just give me a second. I have this quote, and I think I'm going to read it to you because I wasn't sure if I'm going to mention it or not, or if it's any important or not. Um, Let me just think quickly if that's. I think it makes sense. So just to link it to the monomind practice through the lens of spirituality, because a lot of um, practices that I also see in spirituality are really just from that one perspective. But Matt Licata said something that is outlined in the book No Bad Parts. And he says, and I quote, the ego is often spoken about as if it is some sort of self-existing thing that at times takes over us. It seems like some nasty, super unspiritual, ignorant little person living inside and causes us to act in really unevolved ways, creating unending messes in our lives and getting in the way of our progress on the path. It is something to be horribly ashamed of, and the more spiritual we are, the more we will strive to get rid of it, transcend it, or enter into imaginary spiritual wars with it. If we look carefully, we may see that if the ego is anything, it is likely those very voices that are yelling at us to get rid of it. So he touches on something. He touches on something that also captures the relationships of different parts. So let's say we have some part within us that we think is unspiritual or unevolved, and then another part wants to get rid of it, right? That's what he says at the end of it, you know, those very voices that are yelling at us to get rid of it is also just another part. There is another essence within us that is called the self, that is the presence that can be with both parts. The one that we, you know, that some parts think is unevolved, and the part that wants to get rid of the unevolved part. Right? So this is also something that Richard Schwartz saw, especially when he was working with bulimic clients. And internal family systems was, or the parts, the discovery of parts and internal family systems itself was discovered and later on built or refined through the work with bulimic clients. So when Richard Schwartz was working with bulimic clients, he discovered that those clients would say that a part just took over and made them go binge, and then another part would take over after the binge to do the purge, right? And after that, another part would again take over and shame them for the whole thing, and that would be so triggering that the part that did the binge to numb themselves down, basically, or this kind of like a regulating system, right? That part would come up again, and so those people would be caught in a vicious cycle, right? For me personally, I have to say that I used to struggle with bulimia, and I get how that works. And I want to share a little personal story with you. When I was in therapy, classical therapy for my bulimia, and my therapist gave me a sheet to write down what I eat, everything I eat, how I felt before eating it, while eating it, and after eating it. And she gave me the homework to do this for an entire week every day. I did not do it a single time. My parts were not on board on doing that because something within me knew that I did not have the capacity to be with the emotion itself in general already. So this task was way too triggering for the part that wanted to binge, who wanted me to get away from the feeling, right? That was way too triggering. So I couldn't do it. And I did not, and I felt bad that I wasn't able to do it because I didn't understand what was playing out within me, that a part was really feeling like, oh, I have to now be under control of my eating, and I can't. I can't be under control of my eating because there's something below that hasn't been healed, that this part that's driving the binge is trying to protect, right? So those parts are here to protect us, protect a part of us. And in internal family systems, we start to honor that instead of trying to fix that and change that with control and force. So it's a little bit of a different approach. So Dick Schwartz also says that the more he tried to stop his bulimic clients from or to stop the parts from engaging in bulimic behaviors, the worse it would get, right? They would rebel. And I felt that too. The more I would try to control my food intake, the more another part would revolt against it. And here you can already see the dynamic and the relationship the parts have within each other and how not on the same board they are sometimes. And this can make us really feel stuck. All right, maybe you have your own experiences in some other areas of your life where you felt that. Um, I think we all do at some point. And this is just a relationship the parts have. They want to protect something within you, but they don't agree on how to do that. And one of the beautiful things that also subscribes to the idea that no parts are bad is that protective parts, they're often stuck in roles that they hate. They don't like doing that and really become curious and really come into a conversation and relationship with those parts. They reveal us that they are tired and they don't want to do that. They are hating it, but they feel like they can't let go. They need to do that in order to save you or save us, which is very tragic for them in a way, right? Not just for us as the human who is experiencing the aftermath of it, but also for the part itself. But parts are not their burdens. They're actually really valuable member of our inner system. They have their own personalities, their likes, dislikes, their thoughts, their interests, and even their own bodies. And like I said, it is only through the burdens or only through difficult experiences, right, that they got stuck in those extreme roles. So the question becomes then, how can we help them, right? How can we help those parts instead of trying to fix them away, right? Bodil, I just saw your message. Yeah, I'm Sarah Kartika. That's how my name is spelled. And hello. So yeah, for everyone who showed up a little bit later and hasn't seen in the chat, Tari wrote that our technology issues is still going on. So this time I am live with you alone. He's just watching it with you from the sidelines. So this is what we're doing now. So we're adapting, I guess, right? All right, so let's see where we are. Do you have any questions so far? Drop them in the chat. No questions so far? Okay. So I touched on burdens a little bit, right? That the burdens make the parts or force the parts into those extreme roles. And in internal family systems, we do distinguish between two different burdens. One is the personal burdens. Those are direct experiences like abuse by parents of any form. Maybe could be loss of a loved one or parent, accidents, feeling betrayed or abandoned as children, just kind of like the things that really happened to us. And then there are legacy burdens. Those are burdens that we inherited from parents, or we have absorbed them from ethnic groups, or the culture we grew up in or live in. This could be, examples could be racism or patriarchy, right? So these shape, like these burdens, both personal and legacy burdens, they shape how, what roles our parts will take on and if they're really extreme, right? And once the burdens leave the parts' bodies, and there are practices to do that, the parts immediately transform into their original valuable state. So they are not their burdens. So that means that your inner critic can transform into your inner cheerleader, right? And it happens naturally, not because we try to change them, but because we loved them into evolution. We unburdened the part that they were protecting, right? And then they don't need to keep on doing these protective mechanisms or behaviors because we are safe now. That part is safe now. They don't need to protect that part anymore, and they can take on different roles that are more their natural state, which is beautiful. So yeah, last but not least, the self. This is a little bit at the end of this chapter before we go into the exercises, right? The goal in internal family systems, of course, is to form better relationships with our parts. And we have an aspect within us, which is called the self, that can do that. So the self is the aspect within us that is naturally curious, that is naturally compassionate, right? That has patience, that is just presence in a way. The self cannot be damaged by anything that has happened to us, no matter how extreme our parts react to it or the roles that they get into forced into, right? The self itself cannot be damaged. The self is something we have been born with. This is not something that we have to develop. This is something we tap into when we ask our parts to give us a little bit room and to step back a little bit, right? Step to the side and give us enough space for our essence of curiosity and compassion to just come through, right? It's like we're coming through, like the sun and the clouds, right? The sun is always here, and then the clouds just make a little bit of room. We can then fully shine on our parts and help them, right? The self also possesses its own wisdom on how to be with the parts or be in relationship with parts and with other people as well. So this is really, like, I find internal family systems personally really, really beautiful to also navigate interpersonal relationships. It has taught me a lot on that, just by me learning how to relate from myself, right, to my parts. Yeah, I think this is it. I had something else, but it just went out of my mind. I'm just gonna go through your questions here. And Tari was supposed to lead an exercise with you guys, and I did not prepare that, but he's not here, so let me look the exercise up quickly. Deborah, if you have said a part of me feels this, but another part of me feels this other thing, then you have recognized some of your parts. Yes, exactly. Yes. Karen, my last name? Yes, Tari wrote it down. Sarah Kartika. Um, all right. So,
You still can't hear me, I'm guessing.
I can hear you, but can they?
No, they can't hear me.
They can't hear you. I'm talking to
Yeah.
Tari right now. Sorry, guys. I can hear him. Tari, you're
So, Sarah, let me ask you some
yeah.
questions. In terms of IFS, well, not IFS, but parts in relation to the ego, how do they relate?
Okay. So just so you know, so you guys know, Tari just asked me, um, in terms of the ego, how does internal family systems relate that to parts, right? So the ego, what in spiritual field people would call ego, is just a cluster of protective parts, basically. So it's not like one ego that we have, but it's many little parts that we have that are trying to protect us, basically. So they can be different forms of quote unquote egos. Deborah says, through the book, the difference between parts and DID is established. Yes, yes. And I think this difference makes, for the lack of better words, a lot of difference. It can be quite, it's unnerving at times, though. The DID or the parts? Oh, Ivy. Yes. Ivy, you're wondering why my profile pic is a man. Okay. We were supposed to be two. This is Tari, my friend, and he cannot be on the picture here right now because we're having some technical difficulties. That's why. We are co-hosting this actually, but he's more like on Zoom in the background right now because I couldn't bring him up on the camera. But that's why. Um, Sonia, to my question, I think part of me was resistant at that time. It feels easier to understand today. Yeah, that's totally okay. That's totally okay. Some parts are not ready yet at some point, and that's completely understandable. They have their own pace, right? They need to build trust, um, and that's part of the journey. When you learn to be, like when you learn to get more self energy, this will become a little bit easier to come into contact with those parts and to allow them to be the way they are so they can relax and step back. It takes a bit of practice, definitely. Karen says, I have a hard time calling parts firefighter. He says you can change the names. Yes, I don't necessarily call them firefighters either. Um, I sense from the energy if they're a manager or a firefighter. With firefighter, now we are touching on something that most of or some of the people here who haven't touched much into internal family systems yet maybe don't know yet, but we have different protectors, firefighters and managers, and they have different ways of protecting. And firefighters tends to be much more um, impulsive and resistant to any labels or anything we're trying to tell them, right? So it makes very sense to be, changing the names or the ways we behave towards them in the way that suits them a lot. Ah, Deborah, the DID. You have to remind. I have to remind myself of the difference pretty often. Yeah, yeah, I get that. All right, all right. So I think before I'm just gonna say bye and everything. Maybe we can just take a deep breath together and just tune in quickly and see what is alive within you right now. And just sense what parts are coming up today so far. Maybe during the session. And where you can sense them and where you can feel them or hear them in or around your body. You can just notice them and thank them for being there. Maybe extend some loving kindness to them if that's possible. Some warmth. And if that feels complete, then you can come back. Next week, Sonia, we will be not discussing chapter 2, but I will lead you through the exercises that are in chapter 1. So you have a little bit of time to read and to maybe try out the exercises by yourself. All right. So next week it's gonna be with me alone, and then I hope in 2 weeks Tari will be able to join us too, because I really love his insight on the whole thing as well. And it's a bit sad that he couldn't join us here, but yeah. So I will see you next Sunday. Thank you so much for showing up here, and have a great rest of the Sunday or weekend, and see you next week. Bye, everyone.